have one more talker for you tonight. He has been the manager down at Brookfield Farm for the past 2 decades. A lot of people out there probably know Dan Kaplan. Please join me in welcoming Dan.
Wow, all right. All right, well, another side of Dan, here we go. How did I get here? I have no idea how I got here. You're gonna have to ask Oliver about that. That was maybe subterfuge, but how did I get here more deeply? How did anyone get here? How did I write my life story? Is there any logic to it? To your life story? I don't know. I can tell you how mine came together, but it might not be very much help to you because, well, I'm a farmer. And even after 25 years of this, whenever I say that to anybody, they still usually just say, "Oh, really? How'd that happen?" And I think, I have no idea. And I don't know. Well, it's possible that it wouldn't have happened if Pat hadn't died, but that's getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning. I was raised a suburban kid, just a regular suburban kid. Baseball, lots of TV, go to school, get in a little bit of trouble here and there. I can remember sitting behind the pathmark trying to learn how to drink quarts of Miller by eating as many pretzels as possible so that it would make the beer taste a little bit okay. I don't see too many clues about becoming a farmer there. When I was in 10th grade, my parents decided to move to Manhattan. My sister graduated from high school and they worked in Manhattan. They said, "You want to move to Manhattan?" I said, "Sure, let's move to Manhattan." So we moved to Manhattan and, well, closest I came to a farm animal there, I guess, would be Sheep's Meadow in Central Park. Then it was off to Tufts University where I studied Caribbean literature and child development. I was a liberal arts student, otherwise known as what you do before you become a lawyer. I graduated with a BA in Chinese history. I had the world before me. Now what? Farming. There was one thing that comes to mind, one thing I remember. When I was a sophomore in college, my roommate Pat, he went home to China for Christmas vacation. His parents were ethnic Americans who had some reason to take Pat to China. So we went to Hong Kong for Christmas vacation. And I remember on a cold, gray December day, I got a call from my friend John, who told me that Pat had died. I thought, oh, wow, how'd he die? Oh, he's suffocated. I thought, well, I knew Pat had a perpetually stuffy nose and he was a snorer, maybe deviated septum or something like that, but really, I mean, died, like suffocated? I mean, did they tell you anything else? No, that's all they said. They said he suffocated and he died. Well, somehow, I don't know how, we found out eventually that Pat had been snorting heroin, and then Pat got drunk, and then Pat vomited, and then Pat choked on his own vomit. Wow. Wow. Well, all I knew was that Pat was not coming home from Christmas vacation. Well, what's that got to do with farming? I don't know. But it does have something to do with waking up. And it has something to do with waking up with other people. Because a rather large group of us started coming together after we got back to college and just hanging out together. I remember we set up a memorial service. We were helped by a 6-foot 4-inch non-denominational interfaith minister named Scotty McLennan, big head, red hair, who stood out as a really compassionate adult to a bunch of hurting children, and he helped us set up this memorial service. I don't remember if Pat's parents were there or if the university was involved. I do remember that it started with a group listening of Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd. These were weird times. They were very weird times. Well, I also remember that that memorial service had the effect of really tight-knitting this group together into something that, for the first time in my life, felt something like a community, like a family. We would do all kinds of things together. I remember sitting in dorm rooms late at night, drinking a lot of red wine, talking about everything. I can remember this group sometimes would take ecstasy and sit in a big cuddle muddle in the middle of a dorm room. And, well, it wasn't all just drugs, mostly. It wasn't all. It was, I can remember this group put together poetry readings for each other and read stories to each other and played intramural softball together and took walks in the Blue Hills. And I can remember that we started cooking food together and then eating dinner together. And then when we were juniors, we got a house, some of us did, and we had a kitchen. So we had more cooking, and then we had more dinners, and people would just show up for dinner. Like that guy Josh, he would just show up at 6 o'clock every night, and we'd give him dinner. And there was always a lot of food. I remember we started with the food that we grew up with, like spaghetti and meatballs, and then I remember the Moosewood cookbook, some more exotic things like vegetables. And I think this was really the beginning of doing things for ourselves. Well, at some point, I guess we're feeling like a family, and then somebody starts talking about having a farm, and then we're going to have a farm, and we should get a farm, and it should be in British Columbia, and there should be fruit trees, and there should be goats. And I mean, goats. Nobody has ever even seen a goat before. And I don't know why we did that. I don't know why that was. Maybe you feel like a family, and then you want to have a farm. Maybe that's an American thing. Maybe it's in our DNA that we just, you know, that 40 acres and a mule thing, or that frontier ethos thing. But I mean, weren't we just kids in the mid-1980s at Tufts University just trying to figure out what to do with our lives? Farming? I mean, we were interested in the South African divestment movement, and we were concerned with funding Nicaraguan Contras, and we liked the Talking Heads and having nitrous parties, and we were concerned with the rise of the religious right. I mean, it was Reagan. It was Reagan, man. It was Reagan. But farming, I don't know. In retrospect, I think now that, you know, we felt we were growing up in the shadow of that big generation. You know, the big generation, the baby boomers, the folks who had gotten all that attention and grandstanding and with their big ideals and also all their failing and their infighting and their just generally acting weird. We felt like we had inherited a culture that had been just blown up and nothing had really taken its place yet. It was almost as if the radicals had beaten the establishment and the establishment just ran away, abdicated, leaving what? I mean, I remember when I got to Tufts, there were no required courses. Well, there was one required course. You had to take a science class before you graduated. Environmental science, pass, fail. Whose idea was that you should just let a bunch of pimply-faced adolescents educate themselves? And where are my parents in this story? I didn't even mention them. I mean, I think about all the soccer games I've gone to and the piano recitals and college visits, and I think about my parents. I mean, they would give me $20 and they'd leave for the weekend. But what about Pat? Well, here's how I thought about Pat at the time. Here's how I figured his death. I thought, well, turns out that life is short. And surprisingly enough, it turns out that I thought life was precious and that life can be taken away at any time. So I made a logic statement that said, well, you might as well choose to be fully alive, or you might as well just kill yourself and just stop wasting all the air and the food and the water. I remember walking into a bookstore in Lower Manhattan with a friend of mine somewhere around that time, and we stumbled into this bookstore. It's a dark bookstore in Lower Manhattan. It turned out to be a bookstore fully devoted to the works of Rudolf Steiner, a full-fledged wacko bird with lots of interesting ideas to spare. And one that really strikes me and that I really think about now is Steiner's idea that, well, humanity as a whole, if you take humanity as a whole from the very beginning of the project to where we are right now, you could almost think that we were in an adolescent stage right now. That's what we're doing right now. And in Steiner's view, that adolescence was very exciting. It was full of drama. It was full of a lot of energy, and was also full of a lot of chaos, because it wasn't full with a lot of logic, and it was full of a lot of risky behavior. And one of the things that really struck me is that Steiner said that one of the greatest things about adolescence, or the most exciting things, is that there's no guarantee that you're going to make it through to the other side. There's no guarantee that humanity is going to make it through into adulthood. This is exciting, and this is energizing, and this is dangerous. And that's Pat for me now. I can't even remember his last name. I've been trying to remember his last name as I've been thinking about this. It was almost as if Pat, in my mind, is larval Pat. He never made it through. He never got there. And at that point, I made a decision after years and years of stewing in a sea of self-medication, of watching Batman reruns at 4:30 in the afternoon every day at college, and basically doing nothing, that I resolved to grow up and do something. And once I decided that, what I now see was a pretty big void, mostly coming out of a lot of pain and a lot of loneliness. It started to get filled up with all kinds of interests and ideas and thoughts, doing things. I can remember studying Cuban drumming with a master from New York City, and I can remember talking to radical Dominican sisters about the sanctuary movement. And I remember when I was a senior looking at the course catalog and thinking, wow, I really should start this whole thing all over again now. This time I should study something that I could actually do something with. Like maybe I would become a civil engineer. And I don't know, at some point, I'm thinking maybe something with the environment, and then something clicked. Something just clicked for me, and I thought, well, my friends have been talking about a farm, but the environment, the environmental movement, that's something that, you know, it wasn't really happening at that point. It was just getting going, but I thought, well, that's something that I could sink my teeth into, have to do something. It needs some doing, and it's something that cuts across race and class and all kinds of things. Everybody shares the water and the air and the food. And then somebody handed me a little pamphlet called Environmental Opportunities, and in that it showed me that I could trade in my BA with my Chinese history degree from Tufts University with no debt. Thank you very much, Mom and Dad. And I could become an intern on an environmental education ranch in Half Moon Bay, California. There we would teach using the sheep and using the organic gardens. We would teach the kids who visited about the interconnected nature of nature and their place in the web of life. I had no idea where this was going, and I thought, well, that's a good place to start. Well, I guess the rest is history. None of my friends ever pursued their dream of having a farm in British Columbia, but I did. Not so much as a place where we could feed ourselves, but as a place where I could learn one of the essential human activities of living on the earth. And as a place where I could produce something of value for my community. And it turns out as a place where I could witness the cycles of life and death over and over and over again. But in this case, not so much to control them, but to learn how to accept my place in that. And now, even more so, as I've surrounded myself with apprentices, and I've made my farm not only agricultural, but educational, and these apprentices are all at that age when they're all making the decision for their life of what they're gonna do, how they're gonna write their life story. We have even more opportunities to decide whether we're not just gonna destroy what's come in the past, but to actually create something of lasting value with the remaining breaths that we have on this earth. I keep a little diary at the farm. I write the tasks that I do every day in a little notebook. And on every page in the notebook is a week's worth of tasks. And this way I can look back year to year and see what we've been doing and see how we're doing. So for instance, the first week of May, I can see, well, we should be seeding spinach or spreading compost. And if we're not, then we know we're behind or ahead. And this has been really helpful for me learning how to farm because I didn't grow up in a farming family and I had to teach myself and find teachers. And this has been useful for me to figure out how to know what to do. It's also been really useful to reinforce the idea that I live on a wheel that goes around and around and around again. When you get to the end, it takes you back to the beginning and then to the end and then the beginning. And then as you go around, you can see shapes that sort of look familiar and get an idea of what's coming up and start to put some form to these things. We've always said that the smallest unit of learning on the farm is 1 year. It's something I have learned. You only have one chance to grow a tomato. You grow it that year and you're done. And then you have to wait till the next year to do it again. Well, that makes for a very small data set. So really, if you have done this for 19 years on one farm like I have, you're still only as wise as a late teenager in your farming life. Thanks, Pat. But that also has a way of reinforcing the idea that what we're doing is, while unattainable in a perfect way, it will be attainable in a general way. So instead of changing the world like that grandiose generation, we're just doing it day by day, making a better decision this time than we did last time. At least that's the hope. It's more like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, waking up every day in Punxsutawney again, here I am, and hopefully this time I'll avoid that little gray puddle of water with the ice water in it if I remember that it's coming. We witness the cycles of life and death over and over again. But in this case, trying not to put too much at stake in the result. Trying to let the results just be. In this way, I realized that the job I chose is really just another way of letting me try to accept the phone call that I received on that cold, gray December day. It's helping me try to do just a little bit more than Reagan thought we'd be able to do. I still can't remember Pat's last name, but I am still choosing whether I'm going to try to make it through, whether I'm going to pass through to the other side.